We continue now at the top of Daf Lamed Vav Amid Beis and Meseches Kiddushin. This is Kiddushin Daf 36b. On the previous segment, the Gemara asked, what is the source that by the Kabbalah Hadam that's done by men and not by women? And the Gemara says the source is from the pasuk V'hikrivu zu Kabbalah Hadam. It says V'hikrivu b'nei Aaron, and V'hikrivu means the receiving of the blood, and that's how we understand that it is by men and not by women. And the Gemara continues V'hazos, and the sprinkling of the blood also that applies to men and not to women. And the Gemara says Hazah dehecha, the sprinkling where, which Hazah are we talking about? Idapar, if we're talking about the Hazah by the Para Aduma, Elazar Kasuba, it says Elazar over there, meaning to say it's the Kohen Gadol. It doesn't even apply by other Kohanim. Of course, it does not apply to women. And Idapanim, if you're talking about the sprinklings that happen inside the Beis HaMikdash, like by the Paroches or the Mizbeach Hazav, HaKohen HaMashiach Kasuba, also over there it says it's the anointed Kohen, the Kohen Gadol. It does not apply to regular Kohanim. And so the Gemara says, Ella rather Hazah de Ben Of, we're talking about the sprinkling that occurs by the blood of a bird carbon. The Asya Bekal V'chomer mi Ben Son, we have it as a Kal V'chomer from the animal carbon. Uma Ben Son Shalo Kavalo Kohen L'Shchita. So if it's true by an animal, we say that it doesn't have to be a Kohen to do the Shchita, but still Kavalo Kohen L'Hazah, but still the Kohen has to do the sprinkling of the blood. Ben Of, so when it comes to a bird, Shekavalo Kohen L'Melikasa, where a Kohen does have to do the Malika, the pinching of the neck, which is the equivalent of Shchita. When it comes to an oaf, ain't no din sheyikvalo hazah. So shouldn't it be the halacha that by the sprinkling as well, it should be done by a kohen? And Rashi explains, I depara hazoas dama depara aduma. If we're talking about the sprinkling of the blood of the para aduma, Elazar kasabo, it says already Elazar vafilo shar kohanim psulin. Even other kohanim are puzzled. So v'kol shekei nashim, certainly women would not be able to do that hazah. I depnim, if we're talking about the sprinkling inside, meaning hazah depnim, the sprinklings that occur inside the Beis HaMikdash, kegon haparoches, the sprinkling of the paroches, umizbeach hazav, or the golden mizbeach, amurin bepar kohen Mashiach, upar helam davar shel tzibur. Those are mentioned by the Karbonos, the bull of the Kohen Mashiach, and the bull, let's say the Tzibor commits an Aveira. HaKohen HaMashiach Kasubehen, over there also, it says Kohen HaMashiach L'mu'ute Hedyotim. We exclude regular Kohanim, V'kol Shekei Nashim, and certainly we would exclude women. Umay Itzrach Le'latana L'misni, we wouldn't even need to teach such a halacha. And so the Gemara says, Hazoaz Damov, what we're actually talking about is the sprinkling of the bird karbonos, the blood of the bird karbonos. Techsib bechatos of, it says by the carbon chatos, which is a bird chatos. Behiza midam hachatos, it says you sprinkle. Beitzrich lashmina noshim pesulos. We have to teach over here that women can't do that sprinkling. V'naf golei mikal v'chomer mizrikas dam da'olas ben son. We learned that out from the animal carbonola. Techsib be v'zorku b'nei Aaron. It says over there that the sons of Aaron, they do the sprinkling. And Rashi continues, Lo kava lo kohen l'shchita. So when it comes to an animal carbon, a kohen doesn't have to do the shchita. Shashchita kshera bizar, shchita is kosher even by a non-kohen. Dechsev shachat is ben habokor v'yikrivu b'nei Aaron. It says that he does the shchita, and then the b'nei Aaron, they offer it mikabala ve'elach mitzvahs kuna, from the receiving of the blood and onward. That's when a kohen has to do it. Limed ala shchita shekshera bizar. That teaches us that the shchita, the slaughtering, is kosher by a zar. But lahazasa, but when it comes to the animal carbon, so for the sprinkling, lizrikas dama, for the sprinkling of the blood, the kidduchsiv is zark b'nei Aaron. There it says it has to be kohanim, it has to be b'nei Aaron. Benov shekavalo kohen l'melikasa. So when it comes to a bird carbon, where a kohen has to do the malika, techsiv yikrivu hakohen elam mizbeach u'malak esrosho, like it says in the pasuk. So there the hazah has to be done by kohanim. It has to be by men and not by women. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, Chutz mi mincha sota nazira, with the exception of the carbon mincha of the sota and the carbon mincha of the nazira, there the waving is done by the women. And the Gemara says, Amar le Rabbi Eliezer le Rabbi Yoshia the Dori. Rabbi Eliezer said to Rabbi Yoshia of his generation, Lo teisav akarach adamrit li lahashmaita. Don't sit down until you explain to me the following halacha. Minayin lemincha sota shetuuna tenufa. From where do we know that the carbon mincha of the sota requires waving? Minolan, the Gemara says, what do you mean from where do we know? Begufa ksiv, it's written in the pasuk. It says, V'heinef es mincha. It says to wave the mincha. Ela tenufa bebayla minolan. Rather, the question is, how do we know that the waving has to be done by the owner of the carbon? And to that the Gemara says, Asya yad mishlamim. We learn a gzer shava. The word yad it says over here, and the word yad it says by carbon shlamim. Ksevach it says over here, v'lokach hakohen miyad isha. It says the kohen takes it from the hand of the woman. Uchsev hasam, and it says over there, yadav teviena, his hands bring it. Makan kohen afal halan kohen. Just like over here, the kohen does the waving, so too over there the kohen does the waving. And the other direction, malahalan bailam, just like over there the owners do the waving. Afkan bailam, so too over here the owners do the waving. waving, and so they both have to participate in both situations. Hakeitzad haso Kohen machnes yado tachas yad bailam. The Kohen places his hand under the hand of the owner of the Kohen, umenef, and together they wave the carbon. And the Gemara says, Eshkechon Sota, we find that by Sota, Nazira, Minolan. Where do we know the same thing? By the Nazira. And the Gemara says, Asya, Kaf, Kaf, Misota. We have Exer Shav, it says Kaf, it says Pam over here, and it says Pam by Sota. And we learn out, just like over there, by Sota, you have the halach of the waving, so too by the Nazira. And Rashi explains, Rabbi Yoshia the Dore, to Rabbi Yoshia of his generation, Shahaya Bidoro, means to say the Rabbi Yoshi who lived in his generation, Amora Kamosa, who was an Amora just like him. V'yesh l'haven mikan shadayin v'mei Rabbi Eliezer haya Rabbi Yoshia bar plug say the Rabbi Yonas and Kayim. You can understand from here that in the days of Rabbi Eliezer, the Rabbi Yoshia who would generally argue with Rabbi Yonasan was still alive. L'hachi itzrich lemisnei Rabbi Yoshia the Dore, that's why it has to say Rabbi Yoshia of his generation, La'afuke Rabbi Yoshia kshisha, that comes to exclude the older Rabbi Yoshia. And we will note over here that although our text of the Gemara says Rabbi Eliezer, the Mesoras Hashas notes that it should be Tzarech Lomar Elazar, it should be that we're referring over here to Rebbe Elazar. And Rashi continues, B'bayla Minolan, how do we know that the waving is done by the owner of the carbon, meaning Shetahei Hasota Atzma Menifasa? How do we know the Sota herself is the one that waves it? Dilma L'Kohen Kamar Achmona K'dichsev V'lokach HaKohen Miyado Isha. Maybe we're talking about the Kohen doing the waving, like it says in the Pasuk, the Kohen. And so the Gemara said, Hachi Garsinan Makan Kohen Afal Halam Kohen Mal Halam Bailam Afkan Bailam. Just like over here a Kohen, so too over there Kohen. Just like over there the owner, so too over here the owner. And Rashi continues, Yodav Tiviana, it says by the carbon Shlamim Yodav Tiviana, Bebailam Ksiv, again that's the owner. Uvitnufa Mishtai, that's talking about waving. And then the Gemara said, Kaf Kaf Misota, we learn out Kaf Kaf from Sota to Nazira, Besota Ksiv Nasan al Kapeo, Venazir Ksiv Nasan al Kape Hanazir, and so therefore we make that Gezerah Shaveh. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Kol mitzvah shitaluya ba'aretz, any mitzvah that's dependent on the land, eina noheges ela ba'aretz, so it only applies in the land of Eretz Yisrael. V'she'ena taluya ba'aretz, but if it's not dependent on the land, noheges bein ba'aretz, bein v'chutz la'aretz, it applies whether in Eretz Yisrael, and it also applies in chutz la'aretz. And Rashi says, taluya ve'ena taluya, dependent and not dependent, be'gemar mefarish lahu. The Gemara will explain these terms, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Lamed Zayin Amud Aleph.